Good afternoon, everybody. I hope I am clear. Thank you to everybody who's attended the session. My apologies for the slightly late start, but of course, we're using a new tech platform and these sort of things happen. But I'm very happy to welcome you to this session on using tech to empower local and marginalized communities. Today we've got, my name is Bandile Ngiti. I'm from an institution called the Institute for Economic Justice in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I am also the national coordinator for Rethinking Economics for Africa, which is a collection of local groups in South Africa that are affiliated to the Rethinking Economics movement. So today, I'm very, very excited to host this panel. And so I'm just going to kick things off in the following way. I'll just give a brief description and background to this event. Then I'll read the speaker bios. And then we will kick off. We've got quite a large panel today. And so my intention is for us to have a robust conversation. And the idea is that we wanted to have a lot of diversity of thoughts, a lot of diversity of experience. And that's the real way in which we're going to learn the most about all the many different ways that tech can help empower local communities. There's a final speaker who we're still trying to see if she can join us, and perhaps she'll join us after that. So, and just in terms of the ground rules, if anyone's here for the first time, we will, firstly to the speakers, please, when I invite you into the stage, please make sure to put your camera and your mic on so that we can all hear you. And how I'll do it is I'll sort of allow you to give opening remarks for about 10 minutes, where you kind of give a background to the project that you're in, and you'll be able to respond to the question that we've posed. And then, I will pop in just to manage the time and ensure that, we're still going along smoothly. Because of the size of our panel, please don't feel the pressure to, answer all the questions when we get to Q&A, or to, I have to cover all the material. We'll have a lot of time during Q&A, and I think some of the material that we don't cover at the beginning can be covered in the Q&A. To those who are listening in, thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here. You'll see on the right of your screen that you're able to participate in a chat function and also in a Q&A. I just ask that you, if you've got specific questions, for you to post them in the Q&A and not in the chat. That just helps us to see very clearly which of your comments are actually questions. If you can, it would really help if you would put the speaker's name if you've got a specific question. That'll just help us to move along faster so that the speakers don't feel the pressure to answer all the questions. But we'll be drawing from the Q&A, and then I'll also draw in some questions of my own. I think I'm gearing up to have a very interesting conversation on the topic. And so I'll just introduce that, and then afterwards, our first speaker, Ken Granderson, will speak after I give his the bio of him and his partner, Dale. So today's topic is really about reflecting on how tech has shown itself to be a powerful tool to economically empower local communities. And by local communities, I think we've got a special focus on, sort of ethnic minorities or communities in the global south. And tech, has been seen as this great equalizer, because with a smartphone or a cell phone, anyone can access the internet, and that gives a lot of access and opportunity to people who otherwise might not have had opportunity. So these types of tech interventions include, skills development apps, or apps that promotes market access or information sharing. And so in this session, we'll be getting into some of the examples of these initiatives, but also look at the broader social context and the lessons learned by our esteemed panelists in getting local communities to adopt tech and to empower themselves. So this is both an economic conversation and a social conversation. So without further ado, if there's nothing else, finally, we do have tech assistance on support. So just put any questions you have in the chat. I think finally, when you ask your question, you'll have the option to either ask it anonymously, and you'll be able to click that tick box. If not, you put your name, we'll be able to see your name, and we'll be able to. And if you've put your name there and we select your question, we'll just invite you to turn your camera on, turn your microphone on, and you can also join us on the stage to actually ask you the question yourself as you would have wanted it. Yeah. So after that very rushed introduction, I'd like to give you some further information on our first speaker. So Ken Granderson is BlackFacts' Chief Technology Officer. He left where he grew up in Brooklyn's Bed-Stuy neighborhood to attend MIT in the year 1980, where years later he became friends with fellow Black Technologist Dale Dowdie, who he has partnered with on technology projects for communities of color since 1996. As well as put many Black businesses, the entire neighborhood of Roxbury, and the government of the Caribbean island of Saint Lucia online. And a bit more about Dale, who is BlackFacts' CEO. Dale originally hails from Jamaica and was a hacker who became NASA's first teenage hire before coming to Boston to attend Boston University. In addition to working on tech projects for communities of color, Dale's tech consulting firm Intellitech has done projects for Fortune 100 companies, government, and quasi-public corporations. So I just invite you to the stage to put your mic and your camera on, and please take it away for the next 10 minutes.
I think Ken is about to join. I'm Dale, by the way. Okay. Ken is doing the presentation, so he's about to take the lead.
Yeah, I have to react after the fact. Okay, great. So can everyone see?
Yes, they're good.
Fantastic. Okay. So as just introduced, I'm Ken Granderson. I am the mad scientist. Dale is the business expert. So I'm going to cover where we've come from in regard to tech and marginalized communities, and then Dale's going to take it from there and describe where we are going. So some of our background was already mentioned. Yes, Dale goes way back to NASA. I'm at MIT. We met a decade later. We are pioneers in bridging what is called the digital divide of different communities not having access to on the internet and online services. And back in the 90s, we put a bunch of different folks online. So we decided to focus on our local communities. This is a younger version of me and Dale from back in 1996, where we put Boston's communities of color, which are known as Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, online in this project we called Inner City Access. Back then, there was something called the Yellow Pages. There was only one phone company, and the business directory is called the Yellow Pages. And then there were lots of groups who had what they called the Black Pages. So we put the Black Pages online rather than just being a print publication back in '98. Then there was a project that the government was doing called the Empowerment Zone, and we put Boston's Empowerment Zone online back in 1999, and those were predominantly Black businesses in the Boston area. This Boston's main community, Black community of Roxbury, we really did it at a higher level in 2002 with Roxbury.com, which had, of course, a business directory, but this time it self-managed, where the businesses could put in their own information. And Roxbury had events and discussions, etc. As I said, yeah, we were before Eventbrite, before Yelp, before Facebook. There was Roxbury.com. And this, by the way, is technology conceived, created, controlled by us, Black technologists. In 2004, in conjunction with the bank in the middle of US, we did this Biz Insight. Again, this was now a collaboration of us as technologists and a bank, kind of providing a lot of the funding and resources. And I'm mentioning that because there are some lessons that we learned in trying to get and maintain traction that Dale will speak to later. And as mentioned here, 2014, we built the website for the government of Saint Lucia. This is actually a screenshot from today where they have they've just put a new prime minister in there. And so, the Saint Lucia website, the government uses it to communicate with its residents, which the last time I checked, 80% or more mobile phone usage. So these are, while we have not been directly involved in the activities of the government, we have been sort of the technology enablers of these kinds of projects. And so I will pass it on to Dale to explain what we call our content ecosystem with BlackFacts.
So when we envisioned BlackFacts, we actually modeled it as an idea of how do we get content that's relevant to people in particular, and be able to distribute and aggregate that content. So our business model for BlackFacts takes content from trusted sources or directly from consumers, where we'll be adding the ability for people to actually come in and provide content in any format. We then aggregate that content through something that we call Timbuktu, that is our AI-enhanced content management system that then cross-references all that content, and we distribute it in a syndication model to mobile websites, to associations where we have widgets that can be plugged into any website across the internet, and you can share our videos and historical content and news stories about people of color. We envision taking that to the next step in terms of how do we service communities in general, and Ken can take. So we call this the Wakanda Technology Initiative. And again, some people may or may not like the concept, the term Wakanda, but in our mind, from the movie The Black Panther, Wakanda was a society that protected their culture through use of superior technology. And so our initiative is based upon that idea, where we can uplift multiple cultures by using superior technology. And what the model says is that we actually will build the core business services that those communities can utilize, similar to what we had done with Roxbury.com in the past, but now leveraging newer technology, obviously, and more mobile-centric than back in 1996 and 97. And basically empower those communities where each community can buy and sell in and of themselves. They can have credits within their community, so that when you purchase within your particular community from particular vendors, you get credits can be applied to other vendors. But we've always felt that in order to build this model, there was a requirement to actually have allies in government and corporations. Because when we built Roxbury.com, it was so far ahead of its time, the community could not really understand it. Cell phones were not as powerful and capable as they are today. And we were just not able to expand it the way that it needed to be. When we envision the Wakanda Technology Initiative, we think that with partners in government, now we can actually leverage the technology properly, integrate that with vendors like cell phone companies, for example, to make it viable for these communities. When they make purchases within and of themselves, they can get credits that can be applied across the board to other vendors, or credits on their cell phone bill or other utilities, as part of how we want to implement the service.
Oh, so Dale just mentioned, credits on the cell phone. We believe that in order to make these kinds of initiatives happen on the businesses side, small businesses are, trying to just make sure that they stay afloat. So it's very difficult for them to be able to take on new ideas, especially if they're not used to technology. But if people start walking into their shop saying that they found out about it based on this system, and if it brings in business, it's going to get their attention. And one of the best ways to get the consumers to to use something like this is to save them some money on their phone bill, for example. So that's why you can imagine collaboration with the mobile carriers and government being drivers to incentivize people to use it before they really have figured it out or get it to the point where they can't live without it.
And another segment of this is the idea of social shopping, where people buy and sell from each other within the community. Again, this applies not just to, first world countries, but even to third world countries where people are looking to, buy products, textiles, materials from one another, and it's almost like a barter system. At the end of the day, we believe that technology allows, because of the prevalence of cell phones, the technology actually allows for a better way of purchasing and exchanging goods and services within your community. And if we can focus it on in uplifting that community, then the dollars circulate within the community and is better for better served all around, because now that community, those dollars actually go towards buying clothes and food and school for other members of the community. And we believe that leveraging technology in this way is really going to be transformative.
Absolutely. And then I know, my last thought on it is, we are committed, Black technologists who have all of our skin in the game and using these technologies that we've been using forever, to really democratize and build value, for our communities, whether they're local, national, international, and we are, very interested. This is where we're working towards. We're working on BlackFacts today, but this is where we're working towards by finding interested collaborators in various areas. So we love the opportunity to be able to share this idea with you. And anyone who wants our presentation, we can be happy to share it. You can get in touch with us, and that's it for me.
And less than 10 minutes. Excellent.
Thank you very much, and thanks for keeping it tight. I hope people who have been listening will put questions in the Q&A. I think that was a very nice presentation. The only thing one of the things that's come up for me, but I'll park it until it's the Q&A, is when the name Roxbury.com came up, I thought about how special it would feel for a community to have a website named after, their own community. In my head, I had a bit of a daydream thought to say, if I had an ezimangweni.com, that's the community in Zululand that I grew up in. How much more buy-in and excitement would there be when there's a sense that even if Facebook does it, or if there's some other big company that does it, this thing is ours. And that's one thing I think we can park when we get to the Q&A. So thank you very much. Go ahead.
You're a man after my own heart. Yes, I would encourage you to go and register it. And since you mentioned that, I will share this information. It's never been secret, but it's never been publicized that Network Solutions, the first company that registered .coms, is a Black-owned company initially, owned by a man named Emmett McHenry. Yes. Emmett McHenry is his name. He is alive and well and lives in the U.S. So. Fantastic.
And well, now I'll share the second thought, just that you said that, is precisely when you were going through your presentation, there was the sense that you had done this way before, as you said, before Yelp and before these other places. If we were to shift that to today and think about what solutions currently exist, or at least are in the minds of tech creative people that we don't know of today, but we will see kind of in the future when some big company takes it on. And maybe there's a question about, why shouldn't we make a stronger push to support those smaller initiatives now that are currently in the minds of tech creatives in communities of color, to allow them to flourish and to be big websites like Yelp and whatever the case might be. So I'll leave it there before we get into the dialogue, and I'll introduce our next speaker. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ken, if you could turn your camera off. Thank you very much. So our next speaker will be Mathew Lawrence, who is the founder and director of Commonwealth, a think tank that designs ownership models for a democratic and sustainable economy. He's the author of Planet on Fire, a manifesto for the age of environmental breakdown. Thank you, Mathew.
Great. Well, thanks very much for having me. And it's a pleasure to follow on from Ken and Dale and be with some brilliant speakers and practitioners. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context for what Commonwealth is, which is not Commonwealth as in the Queen and the sort of, very problematic institution, but actually reaching back to the tradition of the commons, of the commoning of wealth, and those radical traditions. And it's UK based, although we have, we work with colleagues in the US who work on some of the radical community wealth building initiatives, and indeed have got good friends and colleagues at the IEJ in Johannesburg. And what I really want to touch on is some of the work we've done, both at a sort of systems-wide level around democratizing technology as a way to empower structurally disadvantaged communities, undervoiced communities, underpowered communities, and then also touch on some of the work that Commonwealth does with practitioners on the ground, particularly sort of the digital cooperative sort of movement in the UK and some of the lessons that we've learned, and maybe already I've learned lots of today, but some of the lessons we've learned in engaging with the digital cooperative community and how they've been seeking to sort of serve marginalised communities. So I think the first thing, just to stress, technology is not neutral. I mean, there's a lot of political effort that goes into casting technologies, whether that's, surveillance systems, digital infrastructure, data extraction, how we organize the flows of people in city. Technology is a very wide ranging thing, but a lot of effort goes into casting technology as neutral. But of course, it's very much not. How it's developed, how it's used, who it benefits, deeply reflects and then reproduces the inequalities of power, of voice, of influence within our societies. And therefore, it's sort of, no surprise that many of the sort of technologies we see that get investment, that get promoted, tend to reproduce the sort of, the deeply unequal sort of power structures and hierarchies of sort of the forms of global racial capitalism that we live under. So you can see that, whether it's the development of platform technologies that typically rely on, insecure, highly racialized sort of labor forces, think of Deliveroo, for example, if you're a viewer in the UK, that develop surveillance systems that are sort of ubiquitous and often sort of reproduce, very sort of damaging forms of power inequality. So, or think of Jeff Bezos, rocketing up into space, if that he stayed there, but rocketing up into space based on technologies that often rely on workforces that are marginalized, economically disempowered, and are sort of sweating away to produce vast wealth through this technical system for the few. So that first one is technology is not neutral. It reflects of the underlying structures of power in our society, concentrated corporate ownership, heavy financialization of our economies, this sort of deep inequalities of wealth and power in terms of who has resources and who controls the direction of technological development. But the second thing is that even if technologies aren't neutral and they bend towards those who have power and sort of reproducing their interests, they also can, and I think we've already had through Dale and Ken an example of that. They also have this potential to be emancipatory, to be empowering, to sort of lift up communities and sort of begin to build, incubate new worlds in the present, so a different future in the present. And that's because of their power to coordinate, to amplify, to connect, to sort of share information, to spotlight. The sort of the power of the platform, which right now very often sort of relies on insecure work. Often, if you think of digital cooperatives, which I can touch upon, often they are all about actually how can we use platforms, technologies to coordinate, amplify, and actually democratize how we organize work, how we organize finance, how we organize voice. So I think this is the second thing to say is that we can look all over the world, whether it's and we've got speakers from Palestine. I saw a sort of Black Lives Matter t-shirt on Ken, I think. All these protests in some ways use the emancipatory technology to sort of strike back against deeply unjust power structures. So there's immense emancipatory potential in technology. So then the third thing is the challenge then is politically, and this is certainly what I guess quite a bit of our work in the UK is on, is if there is emancipatory potential in technology, and yet at the moment, technologies bend towards the reproduction of inequality. The political challenge is how can we sort of collectively liberate technology, so that it can help collectively liberate all of us, with an emphasis on empowering disadvantaged and marginalized communities. And so, in some ways we need to think about technologies not that as a neutral thing, as I say, as an abstract technical system, but as something that should be a real focus of technology, whether it's in the politics of work, whether it's in sort of how algorithms sort of shape financial decision making, whether it's in where sort of digital redlining falls and as a result why, and then the consequences of that. But a whole host of things that we have to politicize if we're going to begin to sort of unleash the sort of liberatory potential of technology to serve disadvantaged communities. And so some of the work we've done began to tease out, and this is with a network of digital cooperatives in the UK. So they're some of the things they do is everything from credit unions to serve underbanked communities, to the organization of solidarity networks during COVID, to the scaling up of non-surveillance platforms that sort of serve real needs but don't rely on data extraction, don't rely on disempowering sort of the users and the workers on the platform. They do a whole host of things, and with them develop some of the sort of the principles that we could begin to try and embed to make digital technologies emancipatory by design. I'm back. And those principles would seem to be sort of privacy and anti-surveillance at their core, because that imbalance and information asymmetry is fundamental to sort of the power imbalances of technologies. And the second is, and I'm sorry, I don't know if my connection is going bad, so apologies if it is. It looks like it is on my end, so apologies there. The second sort of principle is the idea, which obviously we would say this given our name is Commonwealth, but really to sort of try and embed a principle of moving from enclosure, so corporate enclosure, the enclosure of wealth, the enclosure of data, to a sort of digital and data commons. So the democratic stewardship and the communal stewardship of digital assets, of digital infrastructure, of things like that. The third, and this is really prevalent for the major sort of digital platforms, Facebook, Google, etc., but thinking about them as not sort of the sort of new commanding heights of a very unequal global economy, but can we turn them into things that are global multi-stakeholder governance entities? So users in India or Argentina or South Africa, etc., would have the rights and the voice to sort of shape and structure digital platforms, much as users in the global north would. And at the moment, it's on very unequal terms, but there's real potential in platforms and digital technology to, of course, create communities of democratic voice, not voiced by economic wealth and power. And then sort of two final principles that have come out in our work with digital cooperatives and sort of wider movements in the UK. One would be reducing corporate power. So technologies right now, as mentioned at the start, they're not neutral. They're really developed towards the sort of reproduction of corporate power, the sort of profitability of the major technologies. And so we can see this right now. The major investors in technology tend to be Amazon and the major corporations. And that might have some benefits on the margin, but in the main, that is not going to be how we're going to get technologies to best serve marginalized and disequalized communities. And the fifth thing, I think that's, in some ways, we worked on this before the pandemic, but it's really come out during the pandemic, is this role, the role of sort of public investment serving social and environmental needs and addressing inequalities in climate injustice, in economic injustice, public investment in the development of R&D and the pooling of IP in sort of commons-based systems of information, property around information. And so we can see the real need for that in something like the vaccine for COVID. There's a whole host of things in which if we want to develop technologies that serve needs and serve marginalized communities in particular, we're going to have to rethink how flows of investment are organized, who has voice in shaping that, and towards what ends they go. So then just to end very briefly, sort of where that gestures towards in the work we've done in the UK. So firstly, it would be about thinking about data and platforms as commons-based institutions. So really reshaping them from things that are controlled by corporate power towards things that are controlled by their users. And so that's a sort of deep democratization of how they're used, to what ends, to what purposes. The second is around digital infrastructure. So, everyone we think should be able to connect, globally, everyone should be able to connect to good, reliable internet as a human right, as a sort of basic right without sort of paying for it by sort of dint of being alive, really. But to deliver that, we're going to have to move away from corporations, which tend to do digital redlining and how they roll out infrastructure, and think about rolling out digital infrastructure like we roll out road networks in the past. This is a sort of public good. Everyone needs to be connected, and we need to do that based on need, not profit, across the world. And then the final thing, as mentioned, is a sort of radical step change in the face of the climate emergency, in the face of global health emergencies, in the face of the sort of systemic crises of inequality and structural racism. A new way of organizing how we invest and towards what ends in terms of research and development, and how we sort of develop out technologies. So they're the sort of three broad things that we think would begin to address some of the systemic crises we're facing in terms of the development of technology, but also at the same time, and in particular, begin to address the disempowerment that some technologies currently do. But with the right framework, we think technologies could really empower all communities, but particularly those at the sharp end of our current system. So I'll end there.
Thank you very much, Mathew, and that was bang on in 10 minutes. It's really exciting as a facilitator when the speakers time. So I really appreciate that. Means we'll have more time for discussion. I think we'll get more to it in the Q&A because we'll have our next speaker now. But some of the things that come to mind from that presentation is firstly, Dale and Ken being from the US, Mathew talking about the UK. That reminds me that just because the US and the UK are developed countries, it doesn't mean that there isn't room for development in those countries. There aren't poor communities or smaller communities in those countries. And I think there's also been a question, but as I said, we'll get to it in the Q&A. We'll just have all the presentations first. But there's a question that's come up for you, Mathew. I don't know if you can read the Q&A, but it talks about how do you move towards a digital commonwealth when large companies have such a hold on digital assets? And also there was a comment in the chat from Mark talking about various locales in the UK and I think in Canada. So please reflect on that, and then we'll bring it up when it's the Q&A. So I'll have our next speaker. I'm also glad to say our final speaker, Pilar, is also here, and they'll be going last. But our next speaker is Rahaf Salahat, who's the International Relations Inspirator at 7 Amla. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. Please correct me when you come on, Rahaf. They're a researcher and translator based in Ramallah. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in political science from Al-Quds Bard College and has received training in international affairs at Bard College in New York City. So I invite you to the stage, and please take it away.
Thank you very much. Right, so the organization I work in is called Hamla. In Palestine and in many places in the Arab world, people use numbers or digits to replace or to when they want to speak in Arabic with the limited letters of the English language. And it basically means campaign. We were founded in 2013, and basically what we are is a center in Palestine that basically advocates for the digital rights of Palestinians. What we do is basically address what we think are the main problems that face Palestinians online. Number one is access to the internet. We think, and we have observed that much of the infrastructure that should exist to enable Palestinians to have almost sovereignty over their presence online is lacking as a result of military occupation in parts of Palestine, specifically the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, as well as histories of restrictions on sovereignty on resources and ability to construct this type of infrastructure and more. So basically access to the internet. And the other main problem is censorship. And we relate this to multiple factors, one of which is the military occupation in Palestine, but also the local government in Palestine as well as the companies themselves, the providers of these services online, specifically social media companies is what we focus on. We work in 3 directions. Basically, we do research and monitoring, where we look at these issues, conduct research about these issues, the histories that have led to these issues, and how we can best deal with them. We also do trainings for youth activists and civil society in Palestine, how to be online safely, how to do your work online in the best and most effective ways. And we do also trainings on like gender sensitive presence online and many, many more topics. And we also focus on advocacy and campaigning. And in our advocacy and campaigning, we focus on governments, i.e. the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. And we also focus on companies, mostly social media companies, but also digital payment companies, surveillance companies, basically tech companies that tend to have a huge influence on the lives of Palestinians online and offline, but when it comes to surveillance and other other technologies that are being used to govern the Palestinian people's lives. So what we strive for is a safe, equitable, and fair digital space for Palestinians. And so how we see ourselves is that we work to provide the baseline for Palestinians to be able to use technologies to empower themselves. And so what I'm going to do is basically centralize the ways Palestinians, and specifically Palestinian youth, have used technologies to empower themselves, and then kind of like outline how we come in and how our work comes in to kind of support that. But I will basically centralize the experiences and the work of the Palestinians, and specifically Palestinian youth themselves. In my presentation, I'll focus on 2 aspects that Palestinians, we think, have used technology to empower themselves. One is amplifying their voices. We think, and we have seen over the years, that Palestinian youth have multiple times took to social media and to the digital realm to voice their experiences and to carry their voice locally and to the world. We think this has happened in basically 2 ways. One, documenting violations of human rights that happen on the ground. And second, mobilizing locally and building solidarities abroad. So basically carrying their voice and documenting the violations that happen on the ground. So when it comes to Palestine, this has been happening for years and years. I mean, ever since people have had access to social media, they've been talking about their experiences, which they naturally would. But I will focus in my presentation on one example that took place this year, which I think was spectacular. In May 2020, two young Palestinians in a neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem began a campaign online to protest or to denounce or to object against a decision by the Supreme Israeli Court to forcefully evict them or forcefully displace them from their home in their neighborhood. And these 2 young people, Muhammad al-Kurd and Muna al-Kurd, took to social media to just tell their story. And their campaign blew up, and they were able to reach hundreds, if not thousands, locally and thousands internationally. And so we think that the way social media or technologies were used in that specific case can be outlined in 5 ways, and more, but then I'm presenting, so I have to outline it in 5 ways. Basically, they were able to begin with to raise awareness about the issue that's happening to their home. So it started all on this new application that is called Clubhouse. It was basically Muna al-Kurd, which is a brilliant young Palestinian woman who took the Clubhouse and just told her story to what was like 500 people on the platform, and basically began to raise awareness about the issue, about like the legal aspects of the issue, and why they're being evicted from their home locally. And what that did is it mobilized young people in Jerusalem and in Palestine to begin to protest in the neighborhood against the eviction. And this later on expanded to larger protests and demonstrations all over the world. But basically, they started off from a clubhouse room and mobilized these protests of hundreds and hundreds in their neighborhood. And so this is one example of how they've used social media to mobilize, to carry their voice. And then after these protests started taking place, they were met by police brutality. Protesters were attacked brutally, and they were also met by extremists in the Israeli society who started organizing lynch mobs against Palestinians and the Arab citizens of Israel. And so in response to that, Palestinians yet again took to social media and started documenting these violations by the government and by these extremists, started demanding a type of accountability from the government and from, for instance, these extremists were organizing themselves on Telegram and WhatsApp. So there was a call for accountability and action by these applications using social media. And so here we see how this like double use or like dual use of social media took place. So like they took their voice to social media, then they used social media to document violations at the same time. And I can drop a video about this story in the comment section if anybody wants to know more. I think it's amazing. But yeah, so this is one example of how Palestinians have used social media to carry their voice and to document violations on the ground. However, I mean, just as Mathew just said, social media is not neutral, and so it is not this wonderful, accessible tool that Palestinians can always reach for and speak as much as they want and demand all the accountability they see. So as in response to all of this action on social media that Palestinian youth led in the past few months, many of the posts and much of the content that was put out online was met with censorship by social media companies. And so this is where we as Hamlet came in. We started to document all of, as much as we could from the posts that were deleted and the accounts that were shut down. We documented, we released a report about a short period between 6th of May and 19th of May. In that period, we documented 500 cases, violations where accounts were removed or content was removed simply for talking about what was going on in this neighborhood in Jerusalem. And I would like to say that this is also like not very specific to that event. It's something that we've observed in Palestine for a long time. It's ongoing and it's something we've been working on ever since we started. But there was a dramatic increase in that month. And so, yeah, like Palestinians have used social media to talk about themselves and to document violations, but also social media has not been the most fair. And we relate this to two main reasons. First, biased policies and algorithms. As Mathew also just said, the technology is not neutral, and whoever designs these technologies and whatever comes into the design of these technologies is going to affect how they are used and affect people's lives. And so we have seen a lot of bias in the content moderation policies and algorithms. And so much of the content that we had seen get removed, we took and we escalated with these social media companies, and then we found out that it was mistaken. It was just the algorithm like flagged it, and it was actually mistaken. And also, as technologies also has not been neutral to Palestinians as a result of these mass reporting campaigns that can often take place. Am I taking too much time?
Can I give you 2 more minutes, please?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Can I give you 2 more minutes, please?
Should I? Okay. 2 minutes. Right, okay. Right, so basically it's not been neutral to us to do these like reporting campaigns that can often take place and where people just mass report posts and they just get deleted. So, right. Okay, the second aspect I wanted to talk about is basically digital payment services. It's something that we work on in Hamle, something that we strive for. In Palestine, we're still denied access to most of the digital payment services. Specifically, we focus at Hamle on PayPal, which still refuses to grant Palestinians access to the service. We believe, and that's something that we work for in Hamle, that having PayPal in Palestine would be significantly life-changing for a lot of freelancers, youth, and businesses and organizations who do crowdfundings and individuals who do crowdfundings for health reasons, education reasons, and many other reasons. It's something that we work on, and it's something that we see like again and again, like happen in different forms. So like most recently, we've seen Venmo ban a bunch of Palestine-related campaigns, and most recently we've seen PayPal partner with ADL, which is an organization that has long tried to hinder the work of pro-Palestine advocates in the U.S. And so it's something that we work on and that we would like to happen in the future, that we think would be incredibly empowering for Palestinians if they have access to. So this is also where we also come in as Hamle, where we try to advocate this company specifically PayPal and other companies to provide their services for Palestinians. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I see a question. I don't know if I should answer now or later. All right, social media platforms have been censoring or flagging people and groups discussing or posting content that is pro-Palestinian and anti. Yeah. Yeah, that is absolutely true. In some of the cases, when content is flagged as anti-Semitic, it's true, and in other cases, it is not. And our work as Hamle is to, when a Palestinian user tells us, like, I think this is a mistaken report, we take it to the companies and we follow their judgment. We cannot claim that no one in Palestine can be anti-Semitic. We denounce anti-Semitism, but it is true that a lot of the time the charge is mistaken when it comes to Palestinian content. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Rahaf. And I'm so sorry that I have to cut you off, but I do think we will have some time towards the end. I think a lot of the things that you've raised are very important. So I do think picking up on the sort of the economic side, sort of the how do you challenge the big companies, that'll be a good thing to think of when it's kind of the next round. And I also think, yeah, that'll be quite interesting to hear about. I'd like to bring on our final panelist, Pilar, and I'll just read their bio. Give me a moment. Pilar is from Moringa School. Pilar manages the Access Department, responsible for low-income youth who receive scholarships to study at Moringa School, which is based in Kenya, I think. This department manages the recruitment and admissions process, as well as the psychosocial, academic, and financial support that is received by the students in their journey as students and later on as graduates. The role involves supporting youth in their journey to look for jobs after graduation. Prior to joining Moringa, Pilar worked in establishing a university for women in Somalia, at a USAID project. And prior to that, Pilar worked in health and education at the World Bank. So thank you very much.
hear me and see me well?
Great, fantastic.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Perfect. So I am currently working with Moringa School within the Access Department, where we provide full scholarships and additional support to youth that come from low-income backgrounds. And the goal is to provide quality education in 6 months that leads directly to employment. So we can go to the next. Wonderful, thank you. So Moringa School is a coding bootcamp. So we provide training in software development and data analysis. And as I said, it provides training in 6 months. So in just this period of time, we educate youth to be able to go directly into employment. And the goal or the mission of the organization is to close the gap skills in Africa, to close the skills gap in Africa. So we've also done research into what are employers looking for and how can we provide the education that youth need to be able to fill the gaps, fill the employment needs of the employers. So since the start of the school, approximately 7 years ago, we've trained 3,000 students. We've had over 1,700 prep graduates. So this is like the basic course in coding. And we've had over 741 graduates in core. So that's the most advanced course in coding. And we have an 85% employment rate. So we can go to the next slide. So a regular school in the sense that students have to pay for their tuition. And so we soon realized that this meant that not everyone had access to the education we provided. So we looked for different partners. In the past 2 years, our most important partner has been the MasterCard Foundation. And the partnership was created to provide education to over 1,500 access students. So the access students are the students that come from low-income backgrounds, and also to support the improvement of the program as a whole and be able to reach a total of 8,000 students. So that would be combining both self-sponsored and access students. And this is a 3-year partnership. Yeah, and it's in Kenya. Our campus is in Nairobi, but since now we have a hybrid model, we have students from all over the world. Although it's the majority are still from Kenya, we do have some from different countries as well. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to speak a little bit about the Access program. And what we've done during COVID. So in the Access program, as I said, we provide full scholarships to our Access students, but we soon realized that just paying for their tuition wasn't enough. And this was because many of them then, well, they don't have a laptop. That's too expensive for most of them. They also struggled to buy internet bundles. Many of them also had very difficult situations at home, so it's not rare to have students who have to take care of several siblings, or who they have their parent or guardian who gets very sick or even dies during the program, and they have to take over and take care of their family. So in order to support our students, we started giving psychosocial support. So we have a therapist with who they can have sessions. And we also have a staff member whose full-time job is calling all the students on a daily or weekly basis, depending on their situation, to check on how they are doing. Again, just because some of them really they have really difficult situations at home, and so these follow-ups do help them stay in the school and continue their studies. And we've also created additional financial support. So when they lose an important member of the family, or the member of the family who was responsible for bringing the income, that can be a big issue. And we saw that often that resulted in the students dropping out. And so to prevent that, we started giving personalized financial support as well. We also give additional academic support, and we give food stipends, because we saw that if they aren't working, many of them did not have money to even buy food. And then, as I mentioned, we provide personalized support. So through the phone calls, we can evaluate if a student is going through a more difficult situation, and if they need some kind of additional support. And so now, speaking about COVID, during the pandemic, our students struggled a lot with their housing situation. And we started offering housing to some of our students, to the ones that had a more difficult situation. And so, for example, this includes students that are in a situation, that are in a household where there is violence or abuse. And so in those situations, we place the students in the housing project. It can also be students that live in well, most of them live in slums or informal settlements, and they might be living in like a 10 square meter room with like 8 other people. So obviously those are very difficult conditions to study. And so students that are going through those situations, they can apply for the housing project, and they can be placed in the housing. Great, we can go to the next slide. So our biggest challenges, well, probably many of the people here experienced difficulties with COVID. So we personally had to move remote in 7 days. And this presented many challenges with our students, because, as I said, they don't have internet at home, most of them. They also live in areas where losing power is not rare, so they could spend several hours a day without power, which would make them fall back in their studies. So COVID-19 did present a lot of challenges. And in addition to the ones I mentioned, financial struggle started to become more common, since a lot of the breadwinners and their families lost their job, and obviously then made the financial situation at home more difficult for many of our students. The biggest issue, I'd say, we have is the low retention of students. So because of the environment they have at home, a lot of times it's difficult. Their financial situation. There are probably many areas in our program that we could improve as well. So yeah, low retention has been the biggest challenge that we've had. And in terms of after they graduate, probably as many of you know, when you're looking for a job, it usually takes several months, right? And so we've seen that for our graduates, that can be a bit challenging. So they can lose motivation if after several months they haven't been able to get the job. So that's something that we struggle with as well. On the next slide, number 6, I've also written a bit about what we have learned. And the most important lessons learned have been, first of all, that understanding the individual needs and tailoring the support to those specific needs is crucial to succeed. And so with this mindset, we created the individualist tracking system, where we basically had a spreadsheet where we categorize students by their level of risk of dropping out. So depending on how difficult their personal situation was, we classified them like at low risk, mid risk, and high risk. And then we had a support system to follow up with the students and provide the support they needed. So basically, instead of waiting until a student reached out saying they wanted to drop out, we tried to identify that with weeks or months in advance and try to provide that support very early on in the process. So like, even if someone said, the breadwinner in my family just got sick, we would start doing follow-ups daily to make sure that in their household, they could still pay for rent, they could still buy food for every member in the family. And like that, we would prevent students from dropping out to be able to get a job and bring income to their household. The second point, environment, as I said, environment at home can act as a strong barrier to success. So if they don't have a conducive environment at home, that can act as a strong barrier, and it can eventually lead to the students dropping out. And we saw in the housing project, we had a 100% retention rate, and compared to a 50 to 70% retention rate among other students outside of the housing, it's obviously a success. So that was one of the biggest lessons learned. The third one, financial support is most effective when also based on merit. So we used to give financial stipends, like the lunch stipends. We used to give them at the start of each week or each month. And we realized that if we started providing it at the end of the week or the month, at the end of the module as well, it would be more likely for students to stay in the program. It would act kind of like a job, right? When you work for 2 or 4 weeks and then you get paid. So the idea was the same. And we actually also saw a good improvement on retention rates when doing this. And surprisingly, the students didn't report more financial struggle. So we were a bit afraid of how it would affect. Okay, I think I have to.
Yes, it's just okay. 1 or 2 more minutes, please.
Okay, perfect. I'll close up in the next minute. Thanks. The 2 last points. So the admissions process was really important to also figure out what students were more likely to graduate. And then the last one was we need to provide other financial products like loans or share income agreements to be able to reach more youth, not only the base of the pyramid, but also middle income population that might be able to afford part of the tuition, but not all. And the last slide, I just have a question for the audience. We know that the housing project worked, as I mentioned, but that's really expensive to run. So if anyone in the audience has any ideas on how we can replicate the impact of the project, but at a lower cost, I would love to hear your thoughts. Or if you have any other thoughts of how to improve the support, I would also love to hear that as well. Great. Well, that's all. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the presentation.
Thank you very much, Pilar, for your presentation. And I think we're all sitting here having had a lot of stimulation from these presentations. As I said, it's slightly unusual to have a 5-panelist panel, but I think the value of that is to, for us to get a whole lot of information and to actually see how different initiatives from different places are trying to empower local communities. So this is how we'll go from here. I think we'll take those who have been asked. So firstly, please pose any questions to Pilar, so that once we get to a round of Pilar's response, sort of I think 3 to 4 minutes each because of the issue of time. But I think in terms of what we'll do now, we will, I think, go to Mathew, because the first questions came to you on what I'd said before, digital commonwealth, and then then afterwards I would like to get Ken and Dale back on to ask a question on how they've found the lessons they've learned in getting community members, especially in their role as customers, to actually buy into the platform. So what are just the normal everyday conversations you use to actually get people to buy into platforms? After that, I think we'll take Rahaf to just say a bit more about the work of Khamla, and there was a question on how those who are outside Palestine can support the work of Khamla. So I think we'll take it from there. I don't think I've missed anyone in Pilau. I think as we go along, we'll find something. Again, I'm very sorry for the short time. Please try to keep your responses a bit short, but I think it'll be helpful because later on you could share your social media and people can engage you there. Thanks, Matthew. In about 3 or 4 minutes, yeah.
Great, perfect. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously in some ways the key question facing most people, not just in this space, but all people who are organising and struggling for sort of a better world. Is like, in many ways, we have a lot of the ideas, we have a lot of the practices. What we often lack is power and the institutional ability to bring that world to life through existing power structures. So I think it's a really interesting question, important fundamental question there about, well, how do you actually build this digital commonwealth when in this case very large companies have such a hold on digital assets, and that allows them not only to make money in the present but also through that control of assets, the digital assets, sort of move further ahead. So I think there's a couple of things. I think one would be, and this isn't enough, but we'll be thinking about how you can begin to prefigure alternatives at the grassroots level, at the local community level, at the citywide level, at the regional level. So I think, many of the examples we've heard today would be examples of how, the things that begin to create cracks in the sort of edifice of a seemingly sort of permanent and immovable present. So whether that's, cities commoning data, requiring, digital companies that operate in their sort of jurisdiction to share certain data sets, et cetera, that's one thing. The other thing would be sort of as discussed, building out digital infrastructure. So whether that's, full fiber networks, whether that's sort of data sort of systems that aren't built on these, policies of extracting as much data as possible from the user, using that information asymmetry to sort of consolidate wealth and power for the platform, and then leaving a sort of unequal and fragmented society behind it. So I think, there is more power than we think in sort of civil society and sort of, social enterprise and the type of examples we've heard, and in sort of the state. Now, of course, the state can, of course, use technologies in very repressive ways, but I think also at the same time, a democratized state can be a key partner. I think also sort of international solidarity, I think there's a question that is really important around poor tech infrastructures in the global south, and I think there's ways we can think through that. I think all these challenges when it comes to the big digital technologies are very much international in nature. They can't be really dealt with in one country. So I think that's really important, and I think international solidarity and sort of minimum sort of standards can help. So I think there's that, there's that layering up of the local, of the national, of the sort of urban or sort of municipal, of beginning to build data commons, beginning to build publicly owned infrastructure that's not based on data extraction and surveillance, new forms of international coordination, solidarity, the scaling of political movements that are demanding political change. How do we center that through our social movements, through our sort of political demands, through our sort of civil society campaigns? And then I think I think also at the same time it might seem very difficult, and in some ways the very large digital companies and monopolies are now some of the most powerful, wealthiest companies in human history, really. So that might seem fairly immovable, but I think, as Rahaf was saying, and as I think lots of people on this call would have seen over, early this year, and of course ongoing, the resilience of the Palestinian people in their struggle, should mean that, like, us in a much smaller scale, how do we struggle against and for a digital commonwealth against these vast corporations? I think it's incumbent upon all of us to, just think creatively about how we can move forwards together, rather than sort of thinking, oh God, this is a really difficult, immovable challenge. So we've just got to sort of keep going and keep thinking innovatively and in solidarity, I guess.
Cool. Thank you very much. Can I bring on Ken and Dale?
Yes. Hello.
Yep, we're on.
Cool.
Hey.
So the question that was asked was how we would go about onboarding individuals.
Yeah, it's onboarding individuals, but also creating buy-in for these local initiatives, that sort of thing.
So the buy-in is on multiple levels. The buy-in on the individual businesses within the community level, we think that that's a challenge that we can overcome. But the way that we would overcome that is to keep the work to be as little as possible on their part. We've already initiated contacts with New York University and some local high schools in New York, where the goal is to have the students go in and stand up the schools in their neighborhood. So what the students are very familiar with technology. They know how to use their cell phones, and they're not tied to, hey, I've got to operate my business on a day-to-day basis. So the idea of students going into a Brooklyn neighborhood or a particular neighborhood in Manhattan basically allows the students to go from door to door and say, listen, we're going to stand you up as yourcommunity.blackfacts.com. And shop, all we want to do is take pictures of your shop, talk about your products, and basically we would have a step-by-step process of them gathering the information about the site and then bringing it back to our system so then we can incorporate it, and suddenly we have an entire neighborhood stood up. And because there's no work required, they really just basically answer some questions, but now we're digitizing their information and putting them online. And because, the internet, you can either be a drop of water or an island or, a coral reef, no matter how good your stuff is, if people don't know where to go to find it, it doesn't matter. Well, if we stand up a neighborhood, it's very easy to spread the word around that neighborhood, like you talked about your neighborhood, so that's our goal, is to leverage students to stand up, shops in the community.
Right. And I would like to add to that. Well, actually, interestingly enough, with the Roxbury.com site that we set up a long time ago, we actually hired some students, some high school students, to canvass the neighborhood. And again, this was pre-cell phone, etc. So they had, paper and pen writing down addresses. Nowadays, because so many of the students will have cell phones that have video cameras and they have GPS, we have an incredible ability between taking pictures, video, and even with the pictures, encoding, making, activating the location stuff. We can, with very little work, with almost zero work on the part of the business, they just talk about their business and show what they have. The students can be the data collectors, right? Where we get location information, et cetera, and they could potentially be incentivized by credit or internships or whatever. Because again, the buy-in's going to come. Someone has to be incentivized. We want the businesses to get to the point where they realize it is to their benefit to put time into this tech stuff, but they're not there yet. So who can we incentivize? We can incentivize the students, so that's where why we think, whether it's government, whether it's a school, whatever, you look for the lowest hanging fruit to get the work done. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a nice way to put it. Look for the lowest hanging fruit to get the work done. And it also seems that this could apply to all these initiatives where you have people who've got the time and the passion to do it. They can be roped in, with the incentives of doing well.
You just took it to another level, right? Well, meaning, with the students, they can be incentivized, but with other initiatives, if you can find someone who is already doing that work and figure out how to present your project as a way where they can do it bigger, faster, better, then I think you've got a winning combination.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much. Rahaf, can I bring you back for you to tell us a bit more about your project?
Right. I think I've said a lot already, but to just touch on this whole payment services issue, to be very brief, the major problem with these services is the way they frame the refusal to operate in places in the West Bank, in Palestine, is basically risk management. And we've refuted that argument. We've seen PayPal and other companies operate in places with major political instability, major corruption, major problems, including Israel itself. It operates in settlements that are neighbors to places where Palestinians live. So apparently it can work in these areas, but right next door where a Palestinian lives, it cannot operate. So there's this issue that we try to refute. And over the years, we've done a lot of research with Palestinian entrepreneurs, Palestinian freelancers, and Palestinian banks and officials, and we've demonstrated the readiness of the Palestinian economy and the Palestinian population to begin to use these services. And so this is how we try to lobby these services and then to advocate them to begin to operate in Palestine, because we think it would change a lot of people's lives. In the upcoming months, Hamra is going to launch a campaign on PayPal, and so anyone who's wanting to support, you can, I dropped the link to our website, and in there you'll find the links to our social media. You can follow up with what we do with our work, and there's a PayPal campaign coming up that you can support. And on the website link, you can find a donation button if that's one way that you can, you think you can support as well. But yeah, just keep up with the campaigns that we work on, keep up with the petitions that we put out, keep up with the work of the partners that we cite, and just keep up with what's going on in Palestine and how Palestinians are trying to put their voice out there. And yeah, this is one example, for instance. So yeah, very glad to be here and very honored to speak next to all of you guys. So thank you.
Thank you, and we're really grateful to be able to have heard of the great work that your organization does. There was a question that did pop up for Pilar, which is what's the possibility of simultaneously generating a job placement program as a complement to the work done by the Moringa School? Could you let us know a bit about that? I think after Pilar's comments, I would want everyone to kind of wrap up. Our conversation has been, in very, very different types of initiatives, but one of the common threads is kind of the big idea that at the local level, people can do things, but also some of these things need sort of broader, systematic, international solidarity. So I think after Pilar's comments, I'd just like all the panelists to prepare to kind of give a 3 to 4 minute again. It'll take us slightly over the time, but another 2 to 3 minutes of wrap up of like kind of the biggest lesson for them, and especially how it applies to the Rethinking Economics students who are our audience today. So Pilar, could you please come on and answer the question on the job placement program?
Thanks so much. I'm happy to see this question program. And in the past year, we've realized that this is a very, very important part of the entire student experience. And we are focusing more resources on this part of the program. And we aim like this to increase employment rate within our access students. So yeah, if you have any specific ideas on how you think we can improve the job placement, I would love to hear your ideas. I can actually write my email address in the chat for you to have it. But yeah, I love that thinking of focusing on job placement because it's what we've realized in the past year. So thanks so much for that.
So if our panelists don't mind, as I'd said, it would be nice to kind of have a 2 to 3 minute wrap up. We've gotten a lot of information. This session was recorded, and so people will be able to go back and see all the information that was shared. But as a 2 to 3 minute wrap up, please just say kind of what's the big theme you want us to take away, especially in the context of the main constituency of this event, which is, university students and others who are passionate about creating change in the world. So Dale, you could go first. Yeah,
I thought everyone was
yeah, Dale and Ken, you could go first, and then I think I can take Mathew, Rahaf, and Pilar again in that order.
Sure. In my mind, the biggest takeaway is that the power of the cell phone has transformed, what can be done nationally and internationally by leveraging technology. And, our mission is tied very closely to working with colleges, universities, as well as high school and K through 12 schools, because our message is, focused on, preservation of our history and culture. But our mission with regards to standing up communities, it's really going to come down to acceptance and the willingness of the students to participate in the programs to stand up their neighborhoods. At the end of the day, when we get a critical mass of urban neighborhoods and communities stood up, it's only then that we can get the buy-in from the corporations and the governments and other bigger entities that they don't believe it's real until it's there. So we have the technology and we have the platform. Now we've got to begin standing up the communities, and only then will we get the politicians and such to be able to fund us taking it to another level.
Yeah. Yes. I would say for me, a big takeaway is that thanks to technologies being advanced and having phones, so readily available, these are computers that are, we have powerful computers right around. When I got started, that didn't exist, yet and still, because the company I was working for wasn't willing to do tuition reimbursement, I taught myself how to code by reading some books and working on stuff. Today, it's even easier because so many things are just completely free to do whatever you want, to create things that maybe you won't get a job for them, but you can create something that can be useful. I'm working on my first book called Teki Chagwalia, Self-Determination Through Technology, because all of the conversation I see in the tech space with folks from Black communities is about get a job, which is great. That's a great start. That's not going to create power. It is businesses and creating what is a need, not just what you're getting paid to put food on the table. So I would encourage folks, think about technology as an empowering tool, because as I discovered over 25 years ago, it works the same regardless of who you are, where you came from, what language you speak. So this is the most democratizing tool in the world, but we have to have the mindset that says we're going to use it to move our communities and our cultures forward.
Very much. Can I bring Mathew on?
Cool. Sorry about that. Well, thanks everyone for a great session. I think just to reiterate that point about the non-neutrality of technologies and technical systems, how they're developed and whose interests they operate, who shapes them. And therefore, even if the sort of power of digital monopolies and their control of digital assets and digital infrastructure, both in the global north and the global south, seems fairly permanent and unshakable, actually, there's a lot of plasticity, there's a lot of sort of ability to shape both on the margins through scaling up democratic alternatives, but also, as societies and international forms of solidarity, there's ways we can begin to sort of challenge their power if we organize. So I think really just stressing both the emancipatory potential of technology, but if we're going to get that, we're going to have to organize and struggle for it.
Thank you very much. Rahaf, for your final comments.
Right. Same thing. Like technology is powerful and has a lot of potential. It can resist the decision of the Supreme Court. It can alleviate communities economically in incredible ways. But it is not accessible for all the same way, and we have to do work to make sure that the marginalized can actually access these services and can actually voice themselves through these platforms, and that we can actually have a fair and equitable tool in digital realm. So yeah.
Thank you very much. So the need for us to extend the access of this, and then Pilar, please go.
Thank you. I would only like to add that I know many of the audience is young people, many students, and I would like to say probably when you work in tech, as in many other industries, you will have to make decisions that have an impact both in terms of revenue and profit, and other decisions that have to do that are related to the impact that you have. And I think it's often easy to fall into the trap of thinking that you either have to have profit or a positive impact. But I think lately we've seen very clear and very good examples of how it's actually possible to do both. So it's obviously more difficult to do. It requires a deeper thinking, deeper analysis. So I would just encourage everyone in this call, when you guys start or when you continue your careers and you have that dilemma, go a step farther and look for a solution that has both a positive impact financially, but also on the communities and countries where you work. So yeah, those are my final thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we are ending off at a good time. Within the digital economies stream, we've had 2 events. I think we've got 2 more. One on a review of the digital divide in 2021. I think that's happening tomorrow. And one on, my mistake. Yeah, that's